Chapter 6 Walpurgisnacht, 1966. The men that walk with Satan, the years are as a day. They know each generation as a dream that drifts away. And they bid mankind make merry and revel while they may. The Men That Walk with Satan by Robert E. Howard. Without the pressure to look respectable as a police photographer, Anton regrew the Mephistophelian beard and mustache. His blue-black hair almost reached the leonine proportions it had when he worked with the big cats in the circus, still unacceptably long by 1956 standards. He had to be neat and trim while working as a cop, but not as a hypnotist. Anton described the house he had in mind, and his real estate agent lined up some places for him to see. On an outing to see a house near the exclusive Sea Cliff area, a few blocks from the Golden Gate Bridge, Anton was immediately intrigued by a weathered, slate-gray Victorian across the street. He was not discouraged by the sold sign in front, nor by the real estate agent who insisted it was not the kind of place he was looking for. Anton knew it was. LaVey takes well-deserved pride in what he has acquired as white elephants. Often rare and increasingly valuable, but always unusual. He gets these items for their intrinsic value to him rather than monetary speculation then. Because of his acquisitive nature, he holds on to them. Cars, for example, he has purchased at one time or another. 1934 Duesenberg, $175. 1937 Cord, $265. 1941 Hollywood Graham, $150. His agent asked to see the inside, and cautioning Anton that the house was already on consignment with his real estate agency, he introduced Anton to the residents as an historian interested in interior design. The owner happened to be there, arranging for the sale of the house. Surprised at Anton's enthusiasm, she proudly gave him the grand tour. As she slowly led Anton through each of the 13 rooms, the woman's conversation revealed that the house had been used at various times as a speakeasy, spiritualist's parlor, and house of ill repute. She tactfully alluded to the many eccentricities that had been added over the years. Secret panels, trapdoors, and hidden rooms. Mary Ellen Pleasant, better known as Mammy Pleasant, San Francisco's most notorious madam during the Barbary Coast days, bought the place for the then young mulatto owner to operate for her. Most closets in the house contained hidden panels that were used to rob the customers while they were being entertained. With secret passages webbing the entire place, it is possible to move throughout the house without once being seen. Various devices were strategically placed to produce rappings and other eerie effects during the seances. Anton was enchanted, and after he told the owner he planned to practice magic in the house, she was equally determined he should be the one to own it. She was glad to find someone who could really appreciate its illustrious history, and who seemed destined to add a little history of his own. Anton was, in fact, offering a little more money than the real estate agency. That was enough of an excuse for her to get out of any commitment she had with them and sell the house to Anton instead. The first thing Anton did after he moved in was to paint the house black. After an unproductive search, he concluded that black house paint was not being manufactured. Anton found some black surplus submarine paint, rented some scaffolding, and went to work. There were a few minor changes to be made on the inside, wallpaper to hang, tiles to replace, and a few coats of paint to add. But by Halloween, The LeVays were ready to show off their new home in grand style. Their midnight party was a glittering success. It was obvious to Anton that there should be many more such events. The house seemed to thrive on gatherings for magical purposes, and it would be a shame to limit his magical explorations here to only one participant. Anton's new neighbors were keeping an eye on all the activity around the strange house, made to look even stranger by its new occupants. There were already rumors flying around the neighborhood of the mysterious man with the lovely wife and daughter walking up the front stairs, trailing a black panther on a leash behind them. At the time, Anton had a black 1949 Citroen, which he parked in front. A low, sinister car, which added to the looming effect of the house. Eventually, some of the older people got curious enough to talk to Anton, which gave him the opportunity to find out even more about his new home. They were glad to tell him the legends surrounding the place, knowing they would be appreciated by this odd young man. There I was, up there on the scaffolding, concentrating on the trim around the windows when I heard a cackling voice behind me. "I used to buy my liquor here." I turned around, and there stood this old duffer who spent the next half hour regaling me with his stories of the all-night parties that used to go on here during Prohibition. The house was originally built in 1987 by a Scottish sea captain on timbers brought around Cape Horn as ship's ballast. The captain presumably spent some happy time in the house, but after 6 years of marriage, his wife disappeared under mysterious circumstances. The captain went off and was never heard from again. After the great San Francisco earthquake of 1906, a grand fireplace was constructed in the front parlor from large paving stones that had been dislodged in the waterfront area. The iron-colored, chiseled stones had originally come from Roman ruins in England, were carried around Cape Horn on sailing ships as ballast, then used as paving stones and filled along the waterfront in San Francisco. Incredibly hard, rough-hewn, dark. They look like the kind of stones one would associate with ancient Druid sacrificial altars. After the earthquake, the stones were piled as rubble, and the owner of the house got a mason to haul cartfuls to her home for the fireplace. An unusually large construction resulted, which would have been considered grotesquely impractical by anyone but Anton. Eventually, this parlor became the main ritual chamber for the Church of Satan. The oversized mantel was large enough for a nude woman to recline comfortably during their satanic ceremonies, photographs of which appeared in periodicals around the world. Anton felt it was a particularly magical connection, that the first public satanic altar was made from stones traced directly to the Roman Empire. It seems the house was designed for Anton, as if he conjured it out of his dreams. As LeVay has said, he never had to go looking for publicity, no matter what his detractors would claim. Publicity has always had a way of finding him. Within a few months of inaugurating his Black House, Herb Caen, San Francisco's most widely read columnist, got wind of Anton's unusual occupations and equally unusual home, complete with a jungle cat and a tarantula meandering through the secret passageways. It made excellent copy. Anton had recently begun performing on the mighty Wurlitzer theater organ at the Lost Weekend Cocktail Lounge, the only instrument of its kind played every night of the week. The Wurlitzer drew aficionados from across the country to hear it. At San Francisco's Civic Auditorium, he was hired to play the largest pipe organ west of Chicago. An Austin concert model originally built for the 1950 Panama Pacific World's Fair. Its 5 keyboards, 8,000 pipes, and unwieldy installation had intimidated the most experienced players. Anton launched into the job without a thought, concentrating on the skills of crowd-pleasing he had developed along the midway. Taken aback by the nonchalance of the new organist, the auditorium's managers offered Anton an ongoing position. Soon he was to become San Francisco city organist, playing for cultural events, conventions, and games. A crowd of influential and eccentric people were gathering around Anton, at ease in the surroundings of his home, and pleased for the opportunity to share iconoclastic interests and hobbies. Before the age of video, it was common practice for people of like mind to form somewhat informal social circles for parties, soirees, dinners, and the like. This extraordinary group of people who came to hobnob at the Black House, Anton came to call the Magic Circle. At first, there was no set itinerary, and the conversations flowed freely over cocktails, accompanied by Anton or another member of the group playing Hammond or piano in the corner. The LeVays hosted 4 major parties a year, at New Year's, Midsummer's Eve, Walpurgisnacht, and Halloween. Elaborate costume parties were held year-round, often following outlandish themes. Blending together LeVay's old carny and circus chums, his friends from the police department and newer additions, wealthy eccentrics and literary iconoclasts, who gathered around LeVay because of his growing reputation as San Francisco's black magician, proved quite a potent brew. Idle chatter about the occult evolved to speculations about the efficacy of magic and spells, spurring on Anton to organize nights of actual ritual for his eager guests. It wasn't until much later that LeVay actually opened his doors to the public and began formalized seminars, charging a moderate fee at the door for lectures on the subjects Anton had come to know so well. Among those first members of what would eventually evolve into the Church of Satan was the Baroness, Carine de Plessen, who grew up in the royal palace of Denmark. She lived in an isolated mountaintop home in Marin County with several Great Danes, and never missed one of Anton's events. Another member was the heir to the Vickers munitions estate, who had known Basil Zaharoff, and told Anton tales of the strange black chapel Zaharoff had at his chateau. LeVay's gatherings have never been ordinary. Those who attended Anton's soirees have always comprised an array of professions and pursuits. There were artists, attorneys, doctors, writers, and law enforcement officers. City Assessor Russell Volden might share the room with Donald Werby, one of San Francisco's most influential property owners. Anthropologist Michael Harner with writer Shana Alexander. A ship's purser might be seated next to a deep-sea diver, a dildo manufacturer next to a plastic surgeon. A famous tattoo artist, the grandson of a U.S. president, the owner of one of the world's largest collections of Fabergé artifacts, all were seen at LeVay's get-togethers. The field of fantasy and science fiction personages alone yielded the likes of Anthony Boucher, August Derleth, Robert Barber Johnson, Reginald Bretnor, Emil Pateja, Stuart Palmer, Clark Ashton Smith, Forrest J. Ackerman, Fritz Lieber Jr., to name a few. Into LeVay's circle of magical compatriots. Through San Francisco socialite Brooks Hunt, Anton was introduced to a man who would have a profound influence on him, Dr. Cecil E. Nixon. Mr. Hunt enjoyed Anton's musicianship and knew of his involvement with hypnosis and magic. He suggested Anton meet Dr. Nixon since their interests seemed to run on the same lines. Dr. Nixon looked like he stepped from the pages of a Victorian novel, with his wing-tipped collars, high-buttoned shoes, and gold pince-nez perched on his nose. The angles of his face were strong, though now grown gaunt over the years. His nose was long and fine, with a thick mustache and hair parted sharply in the middle. He looked exactly what he was, an eccentric who was secretive about most details of his life, self-educated in stage magic, mind-reading, ventriloquism, and hypnotism. Though Dr. Nixon graduated from medical school, he worked in the circus as a hand for some years instead of establishing himself as a doctor. After futilely falling deeply in love with a bareback rider, he left the circus to eventually set up a dental practice. Mostly retired by the time Anton met him, he still had a small office set up in his home for clients who refused to go to anyone else. I've always had an appreciation for characters because of their exclusivity. They are unique. Perhaps it was because of my abiding respect for characters that I had to create something like the Church of Satan. There are a lot of things I could have settled on in my life. I felt competent enough in my abilities as a musician, animal trainer, hypnotist, photographer, painter. Perhaps with enough practice and patience, I might have flourished as any of these things. But I never would have been unique. I never would have been the only one doing it. Constantly being critiqued by my peers, I would have entered a fraternity, so to speak. So I did something no one had ever done before, but not by design. Rather, as a synthesis of all that had gone before. Something that, for good or ill, better or worse, would remove me from any grouping. Dr. Nixon's large home on Broadway Street was his bastion of gentility. He had carved or obtained intricate embellishments and laid them into the ceilings and walls. He filled the house with rococo furnishings, fine statues, unusual art pieces, musical instruments, and antiques he had collected from around the world. There was also a flavor of carnival funhouse, with several of Dr. Nixon's inventions hidden throughout the house, triggered to operate on various cues. Besides the music he had constantly piped to every room of the house, there was a mechanical bird hidden in the living room wall, which flew out every 20 minutes and chirped. His doorbell chimed Chopin's funeral march, and another door, with an ornate satyr's head curved on it, opened on spoken command. Anton was soon included in Dr. Nixon's Saturday night soirees, where the likes of Harry Houdini, pianist/composer Ignaz Paderewski, and actress Gertrude Lawrence had once gathered. While aging socialites sang operatic selections, Anton accompanied them on the ornate Wurlitzer. He provided appropriate background music for dramatic recitations, magic acts, or simply to set the proper mood for those he called potted palms. The palmiest one was Onésime de Buchel, who, recalls Anton, always made little finger sandwiches for the soirees out of questionable meats and spreads. They weren't very good, but no one wanted to say anything. I would constantly find tiny dried-out sandwiches hidden in the organ bench or stashed behind the console. It was anyone's guess how long they'd been there. Dr. Nixon considered Onésima Dubuchel a grand lady by whom all others should be judged. She shared the upstairs with a pleasant and capable woman named Betty Sedgwick. Each had her own room, ostensibly sharing the single bathroom. But rather than reduce herself to a plebeian level, Miss Dubuchel walked a block to a Shell gas station when her needs demanded. That was what Dr. Nixon admired most about Dubuchel, even more than her craggy beauty. She always reminded me of a blend of Mount Rushmore and Margaret Dumont. But the doctor maintained, in one of his most brilliant faux pas, that she must have been a real beauty when she was $22. When Anton came into his life, Dr. Nixon felt he had discovered someone with whom he could really communicate, who was self-educated in the same fields he himself was, and to whom he could confide his deepest secrets. He admired Anton a great deal. His skills as an accomplished musician. Dr. Nixon built an elaborate pipe organ in his home, but couldn't play. Engaging magician, hypnotist, and cynic. He also appreciated the fascination Anton elicited in women. When you come into the room, Dr. Nixon said of Anton, the girls give a little start. Dr. Nixon himself had a great romantic respect for beautiful women and felt that, while it was unnecessary to constantly engage in base sexual calisthenics, there was nothing more pleasurable than fondling a beautiful woman under the quilts. He liked Carol and spent many evenings in the LeVay home. Dr. Nixon adopted Anton as a magical son, a younger reflection of himself, and shared things with him he would share with no other. The most captivating invention Dr. Nixon ever created still survives and continues to impress both scientists and conjurers to this day. Isis, named after the Egyptian goddess, was presented as a carved automaton who lounged on her couch and played the zither to an incredible repertoire of 3,000 tunes. Dr. Nixon spent 15 years on her, applying 150 scientific principles in her construction. She is filled with a series of complex gears, cams, sprockets, solenoids, and electromagnets. And only Dr. Nixon knew the precise vibrations necessary to activate her. After some time of working on Isis with Dr. Nixon, he confided the secret of her operation to Anton, giving him his own typed instructions with handwritten notes, which Anton locked in a vault and has refused to reveal to anyone, in accordance with Dr. Nixon's wishes. I always end up regretting it when I give away secrets. I might be tempted to give bigger ones away if I hadn't seen the effect of giving the little ones away. For a time, Dr. Nixon tried to interest Anton in constructing a blonde automaton named Galatea, who played the violin. Dr. Nixon also spoke of his plans for a castle in the air in Calistoga, a Northern California hot springs resort town. He explained it was to be a large house on a knoll, with mirrors set all around the base of the house at 45-degree angles so they reflected the sky. Surrounding the house at a certain distance down the rise would be an iron fence through which visitors could look and see the house apparently floating above the ground. Besides these projects, Dr. Nixon was working on an autobiography entitled The Castle of Indolence. The only problem with having older friends is you have to see them all die off. It sure would be nice if there really was some place where you could see all your old friends again after you die. Following Nixon's death in 1962, At the age of 82, Bill Hurrah, of Nevada casino and automobile collection fame, bought Isis. But his museum's curators were never able to make her operate. The museum sold her at auction in 1985. The present owner, John Goffin, a master craftsman and conjurer in his own rights, at this writing, restoring Isis and hoping to restore her to her former glory. I am all there was, and is to be, and no mortal hath lifted my veil, engraved on Isis's base. Another illustrious member of Anton's original magic circle was underground filmmaker Kenneth Anger, who, after establishing himself as a leading force in that genre, has since become known as one of Hollywood's most notorious historians, publishing much of the juicier tidbits about its stars in Hollywood Babylon and Hollywood Babylon 2. Starting out at a very young age as an actor himself, as the changeling prince in Midsummer Night's Dream, Anger discovered as a teenager that he liked it much better behind the camera, creating his own unique moods and images. Anger had already filmed Scorpio Rising, which kicked off the popularity of leather and motorcycles, and was filming Inauguration of the Pleasure Dome, based on the stately Pleasure Dome of Kubla Khan by Samuel Taylor Coleridge. Anton and Anger had much in common. Both were born in the same year. Both built cities when they were children, though Anger built a volcano in the middle of his and destroyed his creation in a spectacular display inspired by the eruption of Vesuvius. Both frequented the same childhood haunts as children, predictably encountering each other. Many years later, during pre-production research for Pleasure Dome, Anger traveled to two of Crowley's haunts, Cefalu on Sicily, where he restored much of Crowley's retreat, and Bullskin in Scotland. While there, he also gathered much of the great beast's recordings and texts for magical rituals. Anger introduced LaVey to Marjorie Cameron, John Parsons' widow, who was starring in Pleasure Dome, and who confided to Anton the details of her husband's explosive demise during one of their thelemic rituals. During the time he was developing his magic circle, Anton had maintained his job at Morey's Point a few nights a week. One Sunday night in 1959, a young woman came in who would play a very important role in Anton's life. Diane, a 17-year-old beauty with long blonde hair and enchanting green eyes, worked as an usherette in nearby Pacifica, and was escorted to dinner by her manager, who was obviously smitten with his charming employee. As Anton spoke at the manager's table of magic and ghost hunting, Diane could not hide her enthusiasm. It was not the first time Diane had seen Anton. Once on a fog-shrouded night by the ocean, she was entranced by a race-like white sedan she saw cutting soundlessly through the fog. A mysterious-looking man in black was behind the wheel. She didn't know then that it was Anton LaVey, prowling the night, and his 1937 Cord. Anton was pleased to see that Diane had talked her escort into bringing her to Morey's Point the next Sunday. Anton took the opportunity to gather a little more information about this voluptuous girl, aptly named after the bewitching huntress of mythology. Anton was impressed with Diane's beauty. She looked strikingly like Marilyn in the shape of her face, the white translucence of her flesh, and in a certain unsureness underlying her movements. She seemed to Anton to be a perfect composite of Sheena, Queen of the Jungle, and artist John Wiley's Sweet Gwendolyn. But he was also impressed with the devotion she felt for her family, working nights in the theater and days doing office work in an insurance company, turning over a large portion of her paycheck to her mother. Anton gathered that Diane, like himself, had always been something of a black sheep, an outcast, no matter how much she might have wanted to fit in. Her long, straight hair was not the commonplace sight it was 10 years later in the late 60s. At a time of Jackie Kennedy flips and shellacked beehives, only exotic dancers had long, luxuriant hair. But that was the way Diane liked to wear it, regardless of public opinion. She immediately admired Anton's strong bearing, his mystery, tempered by the sensitivity with which he played. It was obvious there could be no other man for her. She came back to Maury's Point several times until her manager finally realized that he was no match for the man who had won Diane's heart. By that time, Anton and Diane were meeting secretly, and she was slowly becoming more and more an integral part of his life. Over the next few months, Anton spent as much of his free time as he could with Diane, sometimes resorting to sneaking her out through the secret passages of the house, and departing with her hiding in the trunk of his car. His love for Diane grew steadily in response to her unbridled devotion and unquestioning support of all he was doing. Carol and Anton finally divorced late in 1960. The San Francisco Fox Theater was generally conceded to be the grandest movie palace ever built. It had been decided the space could better be used for an office high-rise, and the wreckers were to begin tearing it down. Anton was one of the entertainers present the night the Fox closed its doors forever. Diane, then working as a telephone information operator, pleaded with her supervisor to let her off for the night, explaining that her boyfriend was playing at a very important event. When the supervisor refused, Diane quit. Celebrities and admirers of the lavish theater crowded the aisles that night, paying final homage to an era of opulence that would never be repeated. As the crowd filed out the doors after the show, Anton LaVey played the last organ chords that would ever echo through the building. The Fox Plaza in downtown San Francisco, built on the site of the Fox Theater, is thought to have a curse on it. Offices housed in the building seem to have one problem after another. Diane had the pleasure of taking over Carol's role as hostess to the Magic Circle. Eventually, Anton began to formalize the magical lectures, holding them every Friday night at midnight, the witching hour, and opening them to the public, charging $2.50 per person. In no time, the place was packed to capacity. Anton's lectures included not only occult topics, but esoteric knowledge such as vampires, not only the horror movie version, but some vampires from history in modern days, werewolves, man into animals of various kinds, and methods of achieving transformations, freaks, drawing from Anton's experiences on the back lots of carnivals, fat ladies, midgets, strong men, pinheads, giants, and other human anomalies, along with sword swallowers, geeks, and carnival fakirs. Methods of torture and various devices for pain, including methods of self-mutilation established by the church. Sex theories and revitalization techniques, including gland transplants from monkeys or goats, and recipes for aphrodisiacs. Other topics included haunted houses, ESP, zombies, and homunculi. Most of the seminars were illustrated in some way, and, of course, the lecture on the Black Mass concluded with an authentic ritual that Anton devised, putting together elements from a number of sources. The Black Mass was the original psychodrama, purging the participants of the pain induced by certain societal sacred cows through a lavish ritual of ridicule, parody, and satire. The subject of the ritual changes according to the needs of the group at that time. The Catholic Church, with the mental traumas it induced through repression and guilt, became a prime candidate for lampooning. In order to free the stifled and traumatized from their religion-inspired psychic burdens, satanic ceremonies employed the inverted cross, black candles instead of white, desecration of the host, and the backwards recitation of prayers. One seminar on cannibalism and human sacrifices covered the subject in more than just words. Students were invited to partake of a cooked thigh of a young white woman. The leg had been biopsied and provided by a Berkeley physician who attended Anton's lectures regularly. Diane basted the main course of puaka balava, long pig, and triple sec, fruit juices, and grenadine. She served it with fried bananas and yams, just as the Fiji Islanders did, adding tonka bean wine and caterpillars to round out the meal. The meat was described as tasting somewhere between pork and lamb, with a consistency rather fibrous like pork chops, but sweeter, and not quite as tender or salty as lamb. The diners exhibited little squeamishness except when it came to eating the caterpillars. But the LeVay's 3-year-old daughter, Zena, polished them off with enthusiasm. Anton also developed witches' workshops as an adjunct to the regular seminars, but concentrating more on the skills of applied magic, enchantment, love potions, fortune-telling, and such things specifically pertinent to witchcraft. In 1964, Anton began getting his first wave of heavy publicity. Monique Benoit, society columnist for the San Francisco Chronicle, wrote of Anton as a psychic investigator, spending nights investigating haunted houses and cemeteries, and now holding strange rituals in his menacing black house. Herb Caen included him in his columns again, describing Anton attending the opera, resplendent in a formal black cape with scarlet lining and carrying an antique sword cane. Zoltan, Anton's big black cat, seemed the perfect pet for his black house. Zoltan loved his place in the kitchen, causing problems and startling guests. There was only one time Anton cursed ever keeping an animal like Zoltan in a large city. He disappeared once when he was about 5 years old. Anton and Carol were frantic. Day dragged into day and week into week, and still no sight of him. After 3 or 4 weeks, Anton heard a familiar sound in the back of the building. Investigating, he found Zoltan crouched at the foot of the stairs. He was a pitiful sight. His jaw was broken, hanging slackly from its original position. His paws were raw and bloody, as if he had traveled a great distance. The veterinarian said his jaw had been broken for some time, possibly with a baseball bat or heavy pipe. He tried to mend it with a steel pin. I hate to think what he must have gone through during all that time, Anton recalls. He might have traveled 50 to 100 miles to get back to us after wandering into a truck being loaded or something and being carried off. Perhaps he traveled only at night, keeping to the bushes and trees, frightened. Who knows what he'd been forced to eat? We'd given up hope of ever seeing him again. But Zoltan bounced back to health with a lot of love, a broken fang, and a trick jaw. 3 years later, when Anton was out one evening, Carol opened the front door at the wrong time, and Zoltan darted out into the street. It looked as if he was trying to jump into the window of Anton's car, one of his favorite tricks. Before he could reach the car, he was hit by a passing car and killed. Anton wrapped him in one of his jackets that Zoltan had loved to curl up with to sleep, and buried him in the backyard of his home. He buried Zoltan on the 4th of July, and as he dug into the earth, a calliope could be heard, playing faintly in the distance. Diane knew of Anton's background with big cats, and was prepared when one of Anton's associates purchased a 10-week-old Nubian lion, for which Anton named Tagar. Along with her duties as hostess, model enchantress, mother, and magician's wife, she helped Anton raise the lion cub. Diane divided her time between Tagar and their daughter, Xena Galatea. Carla, now 12, had chosen to stay with Anton and Diane instead of with Mother Carol, now a real estate broker, and was involved in many of Anton's outings with his cohorts. The Victorian house was bustling with activity. Since Anton was the only musician listed in the union directory under Calliope, also the only one listed under band organ and uniphone, he was contacted by anyone who needed a calliope for parades, grand openings, and fairs. It wasn't long before Anton found out about the calliope he had heard playing distantly on that 4th of July when he buried Zoltan. The owner had salvaged a steam boiler from a locomotive and adapted it into a calliope with excessive pressure. Like the old-timers, Anton developed a playing technique with one eye on the pressure gauge, playing fuller chords to release the pressure when it got too high. People got the idea that the reason they used to put calliopes at the end of circus parades was to act as a kind of gleaming Pied Piper, merrily leading all the children to the circus grounds. Actually, the reason they put the calliope at the end of the parade was so that if it exploded, it wouldn't hurt any of the animals. The sponsors of the holiday parades Anton was hired to play were usually Rotarians or Elks, who selected some fresh young beauty pageant winner to act as queen. Dressed in a tasteful bathing suit, the appointed ingenue pasted on a smile and waved stiffly from a shiny open car. Invariably, the calliope would lead the way. Anton, disdainful of the sterility of it all, began putting some of his satanic principles into action. He had Diane and a few of his sexiest witches dress in flashy, low-cut red, white, and blue outfits and ride on the calliope truck with him. With dresses that were too short and too tight, makeup that was too heavy, and bright red lipstick, they had every male onlooker drooling with lust. The parade's queen would wind up hardly noticed. Again, Anton was satisfied to see the forbidden, or in this case, clearly unacceptable, triumph. As publicity swelled, the curious began showing up at the Lost Weekend to ask Anton questions about magic spells, hypnosis, and other phenomena. A significant number of his petitioners were typical barroom drunks. Finally, one of Anton's longtime associates, a police inspector with the unlikely name of Jack Webb, raised the inevitable question. Why don't you make some use of all this magic stuff and the philosophy you've spun around it? You know, you've got the material for the founding of a whole new religion. Do you realize that? Perhaps Anton had already realized that the principles he was formulating, standardizing, could be blended into a new religion. But not a religion of worship and blind faith. He would have to establish something new, which would apply his black magic, while smashing the ignorance and hypocrisy of by the Christian churches. Anton became convinced he was learning methods to harness the dark forces which cause a change in situations or events in accordance with one's will, which would, using normally accepted methods, be unchangeable. There were little things at first. When he was running late, parking places fortuitously appearing in front of crowded theaters where none should have been. Rare books or other items he had been recently coveting, suddenly falling into his hands through strange circumstances. People appearing who Anton had just been thinking about, as if they had been summoned. Could there be an increase in happy coincidences? Or was there more going on than was readily apparent? When Anton applied expanded formulas to the magic circle rituals and began achieving precise and desired effects, professional advances, unexpected rewards, monetary gain, sexual or romantic satisfaction, the elimination of certain enemies, it was apparent to everyone involved that Anton had indeed tapped into the mysterious force of nature. There was the magic, and there was a workable philosophy to go along with it. A down-to-earth, rational, bedrock philosophy that emphasized the carnal, lustful, natural instincts of man without imposing guilt for manufactured sins. To break apart the crust of ignorance and irrationality the Christian churches had fostered over the past 2,000 years, Anton knew it was necessary to blast their very foundations. His ideas could not be just a philosophy that would be too easy to pass off or overlook. Anton would have to blasphemously form a religion, and even more, he would call his new organization a church, consecrated not in the name of God, but in the name of Satan. There had always been a satanic underground, centuries old, but there had never been an organized satanic religion, practicing openly. Anton decided it was high time there was. While there has never been a Church of Satan before, there have been groups dedicated to similar principles. In the mid-18th century, Sir Francis Dashwood formed a group known as the Hellfire Club. Several of the most influential men in England, at the height of England's power, gathered together for satanic feasting, reveling, and debauchery, while shaping the destiny of England and the American colonies. Many historians have minimized the group, saying they were little more than fops and dandies, even though the then Prince of Wales, the Prime Minister, and the Archbishop of Canterbury were included in their number. Benjamin Franklin's association with Dashwood and other members of the group helped lay the foundations for the emerging nation of the United States. LaVey maintains, if people knew of the role the Hellfire Club played in Benjamin Franklin's structuring of America, it could suggest changes like One Nation Under Satan or United Satanic America. Other enclaves of Satanism. 1. The Abbey of Thelema, as described by Rabelais in Gargantua and Pantagruel, as a temple of perpetual indulgence. The motto invented by Rabelais for his monks, do what thou wilt, fais ce que voudras, was reported adopted by Dashwood, used at his abbey at Medmenham, and eventually also taken up by Aleister Crowley for his own abbey of Thelema. 2. group of Hollywood actors and writers in 1930s who forthrightingly paid homage to satanic forces. And 3. 14 Society. Group of skeptics gathered around Charles Fort, master compiler and investigator of strange phenomena, in 1930s and 40s, several members of which later became part of Anton's magic circle. Anton knew the date upon which the first Church of Satan must be established. It would have to be during the traditional night of the most important demonic celebration of the year, when witches and devils roam the earth, orgiastically glorifying the fruition of the spring equinox. Walpurgisnacht, the night of April 30th, May 1st. Anton shaved his head as a part of the founding ritual, and the tradition of medieval executioners, carnival strongmen, and black magicians before him, to gain personal power and enhance the forces surrounding his newly established satanic order. It is the enactment of an illusion at the end of Coleridge's Kubla Khan, an incantation rejecting the Holy Trinity and the spiritual life and favor of one devoted to hell and material pursuits. Traditional to the Yazidi devil worshippers is a rite of passage that the emerging adept must perform. A razor is washed in the waters of Zamzam, the subterranean well of Islam said to be the point of origin for underground streams flowing under the several towers of Satan. The caverns beneath the towers were supposedly tributaries leading to the place of the satanic masters known as Shambhala or Carcosa. The razor is employed to shave the magician's head. Then, shorn of his locks, he leaves the world of the descendants of Adam. To make the ritual complete, Anton declared 1966, Year 1, Anno Satanas, the first year of the reign of Satan. The new age of fire had been inaugurated, and though the ceremony on Walpurgisnacht 1966 was a highly personal, private one, Anton would soon feel the tremors it was to produce around the world.